right, so we're starting a color pencil piece out from scratch. Either you can draw from a good reference photo. This one here is from Pixabay and free to use. I will have the link to that in the description below. But make sure that you draw it on a separate piece of paper, trace it, and transfer it onto the desired paper that you choose, or you can go ahead and trace it directly off the reference photo and then trace it and transfer it to the paper that you're wanting to use. This one here, I chose to use the Black by Fabriano paper, and it's a drawing paper. This is basically for beginners who's wanting to just experiment with color pencil, and let's just say I didn't even use no OMS on this, so that's odorless mineral spirits. I did not use any on this. I just kind of burnished in areas that I'm wanting the pigment to stand out. But what I'm doing is basically transferring the image from my tracing paper onto the black paper, and I am using a white transfer paper in order to do this. Now, the pencils that I will be using in order to color and make this beetle is going to be the Polychromos, and I stuck with just the Polychromos in this piece. And there is my transferred image. So here are the pencils that I chosen out of the Polychromos. As you can see, I got some yellows, some oranges, greens, and what I'm doing to choose those colors is just by looking at my reference photo itself. I'm looking at the greens, the blues, the different kinds of tones of colors, and the shading that's in it. Now, I am working with a black paper, so if I'm really wanting to go super black, I can leave some of the paper showing. But in this case, I'm just going to end up using more of a darker, like blue, in order to put in some of those darker areas. So after you look at your reference photo, that's how you can kind of get, for example, this dark blue, and just kind of look at the different colors that's in the reference photo and just kind of pick them out. The next thing that I'll do is basically take the same type of paper. As you can see here, I got a little strip of the black Fabriano paper, and here I can make a color chart just based off of the colors that I just picked out randomly. So this is where I'll just write them down and just go ahead and do a color chart just by using each of the pencils that I picked out that I look closest to the reference photo. And by doing this, I can kind of judge on when I'm looking at the reference photo and then looking back at my drawing, I can kind of pick from those colors on what I'm wanting to use. So that way I'm got like a certain few that I use. I don't use every single one of them, but I do use a few of them. So now that I have my colors all charted down, as you can tell on the black paper, even though it shows up really nicely, they're just not as super bright as it would be if you were working on like a bright white paper. So your colors are going to be toned down just slightly a bit. So even though my brightest yellows came out not as bright as what it would be on white paper. Now, if I'm wanting my yellow to be a little bit brighter on this black paper, then I could also try doing this, which we'll try right now. So I'm going to take my 106, which happens to be my brightest yellow, and I want to put here 106, and we're going to add white to it. So we're going to put white down first, and then once we put the white down, I'm going to end up going on top of it with the yellow. And that should make it just a slightly bit more brighter than if I were to use it without the white underneath. So there is white underneath that, then the yellow on top. If I were to just do the yellow on the black paper without the white underneath, you can tell that it's just slightly brighter with the white. Now, if I want to come on top of it and just put another layer down of white, just making sure I got good coverage there, and then put the yellow on top. Of course, it's going to make the yellow a little bit more brighter than if you were working directly with the black paper. Now, it's just a slight difference is all it is. It makes it a little bit brighter, but not like in your face bright. So you could end up doing something like that. So you want to at least get your reference photo have it in front of you so that way you can check on your colors and just see where they all go. Basically, you see these greens, you just try and put in some brighter greens in that area, put in your blues where your blues are, and just put in your colors where they go. Now, it sounds kind of funny, kind of sounds like whenever you're doing one of those paint by number things, but basically you really want to keep your eye on the color changes. Let's go ahead and get started, and I'm going to show you up close what I'm doing. So I will zoom this in. Let's see here. We'll zoom this in quite a bit. So here we're zoomed in really close, and I'm going to go ahead and do this little beetle, and you guys can watch me as I'm putting this little guy together. So let's go ahead and jump into this. So the first thing that I'm going to do is pick up my darker blue, and I'm going to basically outline some of the darker areas with this darker blue. Now I'm trying to make sure I cover up some of that white line that's in there. I didn't go in and erase it. I just figured that white is a lot easier to cover. So I went from the dark blue, now I'm going to a light blue, and then I'm transitioning from a light blue to a mid-tone blue to a darker blue as I go around. Now that's just what I see in the reference photo, and that's all I'm doing. Here with the darkest part of his foot, I'm just filling in with that darker blue. And now I'm coming in with a more of a darker yellow. That's not shown in the actual reference photo. I just decided to add a little bit of that golden touch to the leg for a highlight. Looking at my reference photo, I do see some greens in there. So I'm just adding them in where I see them. On his leg, he had a light blue on the outside, and then it went from light to a mid-tone blue to a darker blue to my darkest blue. Along with the little foot that's supposed to be really dark black, I added a blue in there instead, doing a little highlight of some yellow in there. Coming in with some lighter greens. I usually like to start lighter, and if I need to add any dark to it, then I'll add the dark to it on those lightest parts. Here I'm adding in some darker blue toward the bottom of his little antenna, and I'm highlighting some of these areas. It's a little bit lighter for his antenna with some of my golden yellow there. It's probably more of like a yellow ochre is what it is. And then adding in some more of the dark blue, making sure I cover up those little white lines. Now this beetle here is a nice little beginner kind of color pencil piece you can do. Just something smooth and something simple, just to kind of get your bearings on looking at the different colors. Look at the changes in colors and just kind of put them where you see them. I put a little bit of that yellow ochre in there just for the eye, and then put a little bit of white for a highlight. Putting in some greens, just kind of speckling in where I see them. And any of the dark black areas, I've just been using some of that dark blue. Now, as you're going and you're layering and you're putting in wherever you see those highlights and you're just trying to put them in, like here I'm adding a little bit more of a white tone for a highlight on top. That really makes it pop. But just try and put in the colors where you see them. It's going to look a little weird at first. Believe me, it's going to look like, okay, this doesn't look that great. But just keep going with it. Keep on looking at those colors and keep on sticking them in where you see them. Try and concentrate on one area if you need to, and then move on to the next. Here I'm putting in some yellows because it's a little bit of a brighter green there. So I'm putting in my yellow first and then putting in some of the greens, going from light to dark where I see them. And if I'm needing to go a little bit darker with the green, I can go on top of it and add some darker green to it. Now, as you can tell, I am working with a black paper. So my colors are not going to be as bright and vibrant as the reference photo itself, only because of the choice of paper that I chosen. But I just wanted to use the black paper. Just would be a whole lot of fun, but it's going to be no different with working on if you were to choose a white paper and do this beetle on. It's just your colors are going to be a little bit more brighter and more vibrant than mine. The whole key of this is just basically choosing where you stick your colors based off the reference photo, and just keep growing off of that one section and just keep on following your reference photo. using some of maybe your light colors in there. If you're needing some lighter blues, you just add in lighter blue. You can transition on down the further you go. I would usually start off with more of a light hand when you first coming in and putting in your colors. Once you get your colors laid down, if you're needing to go on top of it and kind of burnish some of those colors in there, then you can do that. And that's if you're wanting to use like no odorless mineral spirits. Like I didn't use any on here. I just used my color pencils without using any of it. So you may end up having to burnish if you're wanting to have more of a smoother kind of look to your piece here. Adding some more yellow back into it just to kind of brighten some areas up. And then adding some white to it can always brighten it up a little bit too. Adding some more of my dark blue in some of the areas that's supposed to be black. Now, none of my colors that I've got are exactly identical to the reference photo. You can go that extreme and you can basically use a computer. I've seen people use computers to pick out the colors to get the exact colors, or at least as close as you can to the colors as a reference photo. I didn't do that. I don't usually do that at all, actually. I just take out what I see as being close to the colors that's in the reference photo, but it doesn't have to be the exact thing. Like this orange I threw in there is not anywhere close to the orange that's in the reference photo, but that is okay because I know that even though that orange may be a little bit too bright, if I'm needing to come on top of it with some yellow to kind of darken it a little bit, I can. Or if I'm needing to pick up a gray or something, which I didn't put any grays in this, but if I needed to, I could always pick up a gray and just go on top of that orange and tone it down. So just learn to use just a few pencils and just learn to just kind of make those pencils work. Now, everything takes practice. So as long as you just keep practicing and practicing and learning the layering and learning to use, a small amount of colors would also help. If you had not as many colors, that will definitely help you in trying to layer on top of layer with different color pencils to create the colors that you're needing, or to tone them down, or brighten them up, for instance. Here I'm adding a little bit of white touches in there just to add a little bit more of a highlight to some of the areas. So as you can see, I'm taking the blue, that darker blue, and just kind of putting it in the areas that had the black. Putting in some greens in there too. Putting in some yellows where it's more bright, and then putting green right below it. Adding a little bit of an orange tone, just kind of coming out from the edge there because it was a little bit darker. So I just picked up that orange and just kind of added it in there. Of course, the orange is toned down because of the black paper. So it doesn't actually come out as bright as if it was a white paper. If it was a white paper, I probably wouldn't have chose that orange just because it's a little bit too dark or too light. But I can go on top of it with like a gray pencil if I'm needing to tone it down too. Putting in those little spots underneath his belly here. And now I'm adding a little bit to tone this down a little bit, make it a little bit shadier, like a little darker. I'm using that same dark blue just to kind of go on top of it very lightly to add in a little bit of a shadow. And then I put a little bit of yellow on top too in some areas that I didn't want toned down too much. So here I am. This is a really bright kind of area in this little green area. So I'm putting in yellow first. I'm sticking white on top of it just to make it a little bit brighter. And then coming on top of it in some of the areas with some green. Now as it rounds its back, it's going to change from a green to more of a teal kind of color to a bluish kind of color. So I'm just going to go with my greens, kind of take it up and not all the way to the edge. Just close, so where I can transition the color from that green to more of, a teal or a lighter blue. So here it had a highlight of like mixed in with the blue, like a lighter blue. So I stuck some white in there and some light blue Sticking more of that mid-tone blue in there. And then some of the darker, like a little bit more richer blue in there as I go. And then some of the darker green. I didn't really burnish too much in this like I could have, but I really did like the way it looked and I was happy, so that's when you know when to stop. Sticking some of that darker blue in those spots where the black would be. And I'm going to highlight that little black spot too with a little bit of white. Now that doesn't show that in the reference photo whatsoever, but I did it just to add a little bit of texture and highlight to those little black spots on his back. So now we're going to do this leg, and I'm just going to use some of my kind of like a mid-tone kind of blue just coming out from the side. And then I'm going to put a little bit of green in there because it did have more green in that leg. And then a darker green with a little bit more of that mid-tone blue. So a transition from a blue to a green back to a blue. So I'm just transitioning those colors, using my dark blue for the ends of his little feet there, along with the little golden color kind of hint to it. And now I'm going to go on to his other leg. Now his other leg doesn't have as much green. It's more of a bluish tone like his other legs. So I'm going to start out by doing the lighter blue, and it's in the middle. Is that light reflection blue is in the middle. Then it's like darker on each side there. And then now I'm going to take my dark blue and just finish off his little leg there, or little foot, with a little bit of golden color to it. Now I can always come back in with a little bit of white and add some white to it. That makes a highlight. So if any place needs to be a little bit brighter, add a little bit of white to it, and definitely adds a reflection and gives it a nice little 3D look. Like it definitely adds more volume and more dimension to your piece. Now I'm just finishing off by kind of drawing where that leaf would be going, but I'm not going to finish it off. This is basically done. And so I really hope that you guys enjoyed this video on how to use your color pencils. I'm just finishing off with some highlights here and there, but this is basically it. And this is without using your odorless mineral spirits. And this is the finished piece. If you guys could please leave a like, it definitely helps the channel. And if you haven't subscribed, what are you waiting for? So hit the subscribe button, and I will see you all on the next video. Bye, you guys.